Hello and very warm welcome to this online discussion about the future-ready workforce. My name is Ben Bland and I'm a TV news and business presenter, most often presenting programmes on BBC World News Channel and the domestic UK News Channel. To be honest, I lose track of how many interviews I've done in recent years, how many I've conducted discussing the issue of how we will all work in the future. All of a sudden, a lot of those ideas and theories, well, 2020 has flung us headlong into them. Businesses have been forced to very quickly relook at the way in which employees do their jobs. Sitting in a 9-to-5 office is no longer mandatory or even possible in many cases in order to get the work done. You know, I sometimes wonder how quickly this has moved on and whether it would have moved quite as quickly were it not for the pandemic that we find ourselves in. And I wonder where you're watching this webinar right now. It could just as easily be your kitchen table, your garden, depending on the weather, a coffee shop perhaps, or maybe even on a beach somewhere. Though if you are on a beach, don't tell us because it will just make the rest of us very envious. The point is that a one-size-fits-all approach is now a very old and outdated way of looking at working practices. Businesses have to adapt and they have to adapt fast. Yes, the pandemic forces companies to do this, but another way to look at it is that the pandemic also enables firms to do this in a much bigger and a much bolder way than they might otherwise ever have dared to do as an experiment. Because let's face it, what we're living through in terms of the way we work is a huge experiment. So this is not just a conversation we're going to have about the idea of whether remote working is good or not. That discussion is decades old. And we know the pandemic has forced millions of employees worldwide to work from home or elsewhere. But what will the workforces look like going forwards? And what exactly does an anywhere workforce look like? How do you manage it? How do you keep a cohesive team when they're not all in the same physical space? And we've seen major global companies do U-turns on how they will structure their office footprint in the future, such as Barclays, while others have committed to a complete virtual office like Capital One and Shopify. But is that what employees actually want? And crucially, for the business, will it work in the long term? I'm delighted to say we have an absolute wealth of expertise joining us on the panel today. We have Kristine Dahl Steidel, who is VMware's head of end user computing in Europe, Middle East and Africa. Kristine helps organizations to gain a competitive advantage and helps them to drive employee empowerment by embracing mobility and the digital workspace. We're also delighted to have with us Véronique Karcenty, who is Director of Digital Workspace at Group Orange in France. Véronique runs the team there that provides PC, mobile, and digital collaboration tools to 90,000 employees in order to help them work remotely. And also delighted to have Dr. Benedikt Frey, who is the Oxford Martin City Fellow at the University of Oxford. There he directs the Future of Work programme at the Oxford Martin School. His most recent book, The Technology Trap, was selected as a Financial Times one of the best books of the year in 2019. Now, we want to have a dynamic debate with the panel around these issues, find out how businesses and employees are coping in reality, and also unearth some practical advice for business leaders to make sure they can navigate this move to an anywhere workforce from the management, from the cultural, and from the technological perspectives. We want your input as well. You can put your questions to the panel through the chat function. Please put those in as they occur to you, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. To begin with, though, I'd like to hand to Kristine to take us through some of the research, the new global research from VMware, exploring how perceptions of new working practices have changed. Kristine.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, Ben, and welcome to our panel debate. You know, if the sudden national lockdowns provided anything to a broad base of knowledge and proved anything to the business world, it is really that the distributed workforce model can work. And indeed it has worked. And we've seen that across the globe over the last half year. And I guess most of us, we still live this model of work every day. And for many workers, you know, working away from the rules of the office is in line with a desire that they've already expressed to be less tied to a physical office and less reliant on commute into busy city hubs. So against that backdrop, VMware are launching the results from our global research study in collaboration with Vanson Bourne. And I will take you through some of the key research findings in this report. But let me jump to conclusions by saying that what is very clear is that a distributed workforce model is indeed here to stay. And when we say distributed workforce, we are not limiting it to just remote working, because we've done that for years. So instead, the distributed workforce model is about a hybrid approach, where it doesn't matter where employees are working, whether it be from the office, at home, on the move, or a combination of all three of them. The way that we work is really adapting, and we need to be so-called anywhere organizations, and we cannot be bound by locations anymore. So let's jump into some of the key findings. And the research clearly shows that the perception of distributed working has shifted. Our research highlights that it's a 41% increase in the proportion of employees who recognize distributed working as a prerequisite rather than just a perk. So since the pandemic, more and more employees are now seeing the distributed working model as something that should be built into the business model, not just an add-on benefit. And if we look at this perception across generations, it is within Generation X that we saw the biggest change in this view, pre versus post-COVID. I'm not sure if we can say that we are post-COVID, but hopefully we will get there. So it becomes evident that it's crucial that businesses have the right leadership, the culture, and the policies in place to embrace this. A one-size-fits-all approach is no longer valid. And you would think that line of sight management is a thing of the past. However, our research shows that management is still measuring productivity in terms of time at the desk or in the office, rather than based on the actual output or engagement or value of work. And it also shows that employees in general feel more pressured to work beyond hours. So management practices must adapt to not having employees in line of sight 100% of the time. It is really critical that you have this element of trust between workers and business leaders. And this mindset needs to start in the boardroom and penetrate across the entire business. Now, however, the research also shows that there are clear benefits to the distributed way of working. So this new way has demonstrated proven benefits to employee stress levels, to improving colleague relationships, and also confidence and the ability to speak up in meetings. So we can clearly see that employees are reporting to be happier, more productive, and collaborating more regularly. And businesses need to recognize these positive effects of accepting distributed working. Now, you would think that employee morale and productivity would have been areas of concern. And we have all been thrown without any warning into this distributed working full time. But our research is clearly indicating that there is no need for concern, with boosts both in morale and productivity. As a matter of fact, 30% said that morale has increased, and 33% said that productivity has increased. And there has also been a clear effect on the ability to recruit top talent. And in fact, this is seen across multiple groups of people: working parents, people with disability, ethnic minority backgrounds, and also people living outside of the economic hub areas. So lastly, IT is no longer viewed as a barrier to working from beyond the office. We have proven that employees can work distributed, from headquarters, from home, on the move, or a combination of those locations as the standard way of working. So technology is readily available to employees and to collaborate and to communicate with colleagues, partners, and customers as efficiently, if not even more efficiently, than we would face-to-face. So as my closing remark, we see two main conclusions coming out of this research. And the first is that the future of work has arrived in the form of a distributed workforce, bringing with it business benefits from productivity to employee morale to greater collaboration and enhanced recruitment opportunities. But are businesses really ready for this? Because the second conclusion is that while technology is no longer a barrier, something needs to change within the leadership teams and the management styles and the business culture if companies are to successfully embrace the changing model of the distributed workforce.
Kristine, thank you very much indeed for that. And I think that research throws up some really interesting ideas and points. You have this notion that there are benefits to be had from embracing and driving ahead with this anywhere working approach, but clearly there are concerns and hurdles. It was interesting on the recruitment aspect, when you drill down into that, among the benefits, employers had noted, business leaders had noted that there'd been a really positive effect on recruitment, particularly at top tier level when it came to recruiting working parents and minority candidates. When you look at the more general points, you have an interesting clash though. You have more employees seeing remote working as a given, as a prerequisite, something they expect their employers to offer and to facilitate. Yet a substantial proportion of business leaders see a concern around productivity. They worry their team won't be as productive, won't stay on task. So I think there's a challenge there in how do you marry up these conflicting feelings. Before we get into the debate, I'd just like to invite our other panelists to share their thoughts and what jumped out at them and their initial feelings about the research. And we'll start with Véronique Karcenty from Group Orange France. Véronique.
Well, thank you, Kristine, because exactly what you said is what we've seen in our company. I'm not worried about the top talents. I'm a little bit more worried about the normal employees, because everyone is not so easy with the techniques. So first, secondly, we are not very clear at the moment if we should allow 5 days a week of remote or 3 days max. Within Orange, we are much more on a 3 days per week trend. And we are going to see if it's acceptable for the managers, because I think the more risky people are the middle managers, because they have to change all their ways of measuring, controlling, keeping their team spirit. So that's the point we have. And of course, after that, the training. How do we how are we sure that people are well trained, and how do they follow the training, especially for the newcomers, and the problems of recruitment, of course, because how do we onboard new people? How do we create what we call, maybe it's a Latin way of seeing the world, but creating the team spirit, the commitment, the belonging to the company, and we are really have a lot of questions about that around that subject. But globally, we see exactly what you said. Before the crisis, we had around 20% people in remote working at home. During the crisis, and even now, which is still a crisis, but we've had a survey, and 65, around 70% of our employees said that they would love to have a remote time in the week. So we see it's a really strong trend, and we are going to in this way. So we can't make without that.
Okay, Véronique, thank you very much. And some really important points raised from those reflections about how you structure it. And the reality, I think, for a lot of firms is they're going to have a hybrid model. They will have a split of time from employees spending some of the time in the office and spending some of the time remotely. That in itself throws up questions. How do you coordinate that across firms, because perhaps, you'll have certain teams in on a Monday and a Tuesday, but what if your client firms bring the relevant teams that those people deal with in on a Thursday and Friday? That throws up a challenge in itself, on top of the questions around measuring work and productivity, managing the workforce, training new joiners, and just making sure that people have the support they need, because it goes beyond just the skills to do the job. There's an employee welfare question to throw in there as well. Véronique, thank you very much for flagging up many of those key points that we'll come to in the debate. Just before we start the debate, I'd like to bring in Dr. Benedikt Frey from the University of Oxford to give your reflections on the research that Christina outlined as well, and what jumps out at you as the really key points.
I think there were a number of really interesting points in there. I think one of the key takeaways is clearly that a lot of people expect to be able to work remotely or on the road or whatever they choose to. But at the same time feeling pressured to work outside office hours. And this is actually something we see more broadly if we look at data of self-employed people. They tend to experience greater life satisfaction, but also more anxiety, probably in part because of the greater responsibility associated with that. And if you're switching to sort of more hybrid model, what you will get is this sort of same sort of polarization. On the one hand, people treasure the flexibility, but on the other hand, it comes with additional responsibility. And I think the key issue for management going forward will be how to handle this, and in the sense that you want to provide the flexibility, but you also want to manage the downside. And I think that in turn has a lot to do with managing expectations and making sure that people know what they will be evaluated based upon. And that in turn goes to management systems. So consider the following situation. You have a centrally located office. You have a team leader who likes to work from the office. You have one member of the team who is well off and can afford to live close to the office in the city. You have another team member who's less well off and is living further away. Now, the situation or the outcome from that will be that the person who has the benefit of being close to the office will come in more often, will be able to bond with the team leader. The person living more outside will probably do less so. And that is going to also presumably have consequences for promotion, unless you make very clear what promotions and what sort of evaluation criteria that are relevant in this case, because we're going to have to shift from a model which is more outcome-based to a model from a model that's been based on inputs. There will be no brownie points any longer for just showing up at the office, or at least there shouldn't be. So it's a question of clear signaling from management. These are the criteria upon which you are evaluated, and there is no extra brownie points for coming in to the office. Otherwise, you will have a situation where a lot of people will feel forced to make that commute into the office in order not to have the feeling of being disadvantaged. And for firms, obviously, there's a great risk of people that live further away than being disadvantaged by the model, which in turn could lead to bad outcomes when it comes to diversity.
Okay, Dr. Frey, thank you very much. And I think the key theme that emerges from that is the issue of fairness and how you can treat your team fairly when you have this anywhere working setup in a way that doesn't disadvantage either those who are not able to or don't need to come into the office, but equally to not disadvantage those that you are requiring to come into the office because the nature of their job requires it. And it is a very delicate balance, I think, to manage that, to avoid any sort of resentment emerging, because of course it will be harder and it will take longer to pick up on those sorts of feelings if you're not seeing your team as often as you would be if you were in the same physical space. So thank you all for outlining your initial reactions to the research. I want to get stuck into the debate now. And as I say, we're very keen, those of you attending this webinar, we don't want it to be just a wall of us talking at you. We want to involve you and involve your questions and experiences as well. If you're prompted, if thoughts are prompted by anything that you hear, please put that into the Q&A window, and we'll weave those in as we go along. To kick off the panel debate though, I just want to look at the broader question of, do we think an anywhere workforce is possible long-term for businesses? I mean, post-pandemic, and why should boardrooms be talking about it right now? And I'd like, Kristine, if you could start us off on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think that the model of the distributed workforce, it's proven that it's here to stay. And the benefits of remote work, they have truly been realized within organizations across the world, although it has its drawbacks as well, and we need to focus on the cultural aspects around the anywhere organization. But it is, as Véronique said, it is really the future of work. It's here, it's now, and it's brought with it tangible business benefits. Of course, huge saving possibly for organizations in everything from real estate to travel to commute. But more importantly, productivity and greater collaboration and enhanced recruitment opportunities. I mean, imagine for a global organization like for us in VMware, I mean, attracting talent from all over the world, regardless of where they prefer to live, where they prefer to work, from all groups of society, and letting them work when and where it's best for them. It's a huge business opportunity. And that is why it is so important that organizations realize that we need to embrace this new way of working. However, we need to rethink all aspects of employee experience. It's not just the physical experience, but the cultural employee experience. And to Carl's point, embracing that hybrid model, because it's not either or. It's about embracing both and making sure that we manage that distributed workforce in terms of collaboration, interaction, and getting those meaningful conversations, even in a virtual format, like we're trying to achieve now. And I think we can all realize it's difficult. It's different than meeting in person, and we need to embrace those new ways of engaging.
That's a really interesting point you raised there at the outset, Kristine, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it, Dr. Frey, because if we're saying that it is possible long term and boardrooms should be talking about it, some of those points that Kristine raised will be in business leaders' minds as a matter of concern. For example, the costs associated with it. There are overheads to equipping all your employees with laptops. It might be that people need to have better broadband connections and better connectivity, and that cost falls on the business. Why do you think, Dr. Frey, that boardrooms, when weighing up the costs associated with it, should fall in favor of facilitating the anywhere way of working?
I think there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, as the report suggests, a lot of people see this as a perk. As a prerequisite rather than a perk. So in order to attract talent, you will need to offer something which is lucrative for talent. And if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to attract the best people. That's the first part. The second part is that there are a number of studies that show that productivity tends to go up when people work at home. So it has been good for productivity. And as Kristine mentioned as well, there are cost savings associated with real estate and with labor costs as well. If people can work from anywhere, that means that they don't have to cluster necessarily in city centers where real estate is expensive. They can move out further. And if people don't cluster any longer in city centers, it's also no longer essential that the office space is necessarily located there. Secondly, or thirdly, if something can be done remotely, it can also be done offshore. And there's a real opportunity for businesses to cut labor costs by offshoring some work. And I think this is something that is going to be hugely beneficial for developing countries, because what we've seen over recent decades is that manufacturing work is no longer providing the same escalator to middle income status that it used to do, because it's becoming increasingly automated. And that a few countries have actually managed to grow quite rapidly on the basis of service-led growth. Think of India and the Philippines. And I think those models to economic development are also going to become available to more countries as a result of this.
Thank you, Dr. Frey. Véronique, what's your experience of it within your company? Is it something that is being talked about and discussed at board level? And what is the view of this new way of working among your colleagues?
Oops, the mute. There are a lot of questions and not all the answers. We have questions. I agree with the cost saving around real estate, around also a sort of sustainability which allow that, which says that we don't move a lot, so we have less expense in oil and in gasoline and in cars and in etc. etc. So we have also that to take into account. We have problems around the discussion we have with our trade unions, because you can imagine that if everyone can work in remote, and of course, as said, Carl, can be offshored, it will, I mean, give a lot of problems for the workers in France, for example, in my case. So we can't imagine to offshore everything, and of course it will force us to think differently our ways of working and our ways of make or buy policies, etc., etc. So it's a little bit worrying for the managers, because they have to change everything in their ways of thinking. They have to make a little bit more of trust, in fact, because when you don't see your team all the time, you have to trust them and to say, okay, I don't see you 2 days. I can't see you 2 days or 3 days a week. So I have to think you are doing a good work, and okay, we'll see the result at the end of the month or the end of the day or the end of the week. I don't know. It depends on the way you measure, but I think it will change also the trust. I think it's not very easy to measure, but it's a new way of work, and we are all trying to be so much agile that it's a new way of managing that we have to invent. But it's not so easy in France, because the state of mind is a little bit more in what we call a présentiel. I mean, the being on the physical way of working, and we are just speaking about phygital, a mix of physical and digital. So it's a phygital way of working and way of managing that we are trying to invent and to impulse on the field. I think it will take a little bit time, really, because it's easy for a top talent to understand that, a little bit less easy for an employee on the field to understand and to feel that very, very well.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting topic, Véronique, and especially around trust between employer and employee. And I think that is also why we saw in this research, it's a generational shift and an evolution, because I mean, generations to come, they are more used to establishing trust and getting to know people in a virtual world than we are, because we are used to traditionally being in the office. So how that will evolve it's very interesting to see. And obviously, as business leaders, we need to incorporate all the cultural differences out there. That is absolutely an additional challenge for organizations going forward.
I just want to bring Dr. Frey in, because those points from Véronique and Kristine have prompted a question already. And please, those of you watching, do keep your questions coming. The question is, if the new way of working exists, it is an opportunity. Is it an opportunity for companies to cut many layers from the organization? And Véronique touched on that, you touched on that, Dr. Frey. And the question goes on to say, after all, if you place more responsibility with the employees, who must be more self-managing, then you don't need all the layers of middle management. So my question to you, Dr. Frey, is, will we perhaps see swathes of middle management removed from firms? And if there are managers watching this now, wanting to make sure they stay relevant and useful in this new way of working, what does a good manager now look like in this new world?
Well, I think we've seen cuts to middle management for some time, and I think that is in large part of a consequence of changes to production, right? In a mass production society where businesses are run by command and control, you need a lot of layers. In a world where you have, a lot more production tasks being automated away, some clerical work also increasingly being done quite easily with the use of technology, and you have more creative class, if you like, at the top. What technology has done is to empower those who are more creative at the expense of a lot of more routinized work, which can be offshored or automated away. And I think the way to stay relevant is to be part of the creative class, if you like. They are the ones who've benefited from computerization. They are the ones who benefited the most from digital, because if you do something that is truly creative, all of a sudden you have technology to export it all around the world within a split second. And so technology makes those skills tremendously beneficial. And at the same time, we're not moving towards a model which is completely distributed and everybody, do what they do with themselves. We still need to collaborate, and somebody still needs to, evaluate teams and, set targets, set goals, motivate colleagues, and so on and so forth. So we're not seeing the end to middle management. I think we're simply seeing a continuation of a trend that has been going on now for some time.
Okay, Dr. Frey, thank you very much for that. And I suppose the second topic, the second area of discussion that I'd like to move us on to is this idea that emerged from the research of being out of sight, but being still in mind. And Véronique, if you could start us off on this one, how can business leaders feel comfortable with this approach where their teams are not in the same physical space as them, they're not seeing them on a daily basis, they're not able to check what time they start and what time they finish quite as easily? And how does management effectively switch to, rather than an hours-based approach, to perhaps a more value or outcome-based approach?
Yeah, the big problem will be, as you said, the business hours. I mean, the business hours are maybe going to change, not for the people in front of the customers, because of course they have opening hours and closing hours, but for people who can work remotely and give back their work, I mean, at 11 in the night or early in the morning, how can we really, I wouldn't say control, but be sure that first they do all the hours they are paid for first, because we have that sort of control to have also. Do they also stop working in a way to rest and to have, in France we have a rule which is that you have to stop 11 hours between one vacation and the other. How do we control that? So what is the legal the legal parts we have to change, and how can we negotiate that with the unions, because we have unions that are really present in our companies. So all those questions around the business hours are going to be reinvented, and the managers will have also to reinvent their way of working with their teams, with people beginning or starting early in the morning, or people stopping late in the night. Will it be easy? Will it be controlled or not? So we are going to have to recruit managers with soft skills, very adaptive, very open, very easy to adapt to each of their employee. And I mean, it's easy to do. I do that every day, and since a lot of years, but for a lot for many years. I'm the only French on the panelist, you know. So I claim for indulgence. But really, the point is to be employers and employees comfortable with a new way of working, and at this condition, we'll succeed in everything. I mean, it's not so difficult. It is just a transformation, and the transformation is something that takes a little bit of time, because as you know, some people are resistant to a transformation, and so we'll have to help them to understand, to feel comfortable, to find a new rhythm of work, rhythm of life, because when you work remotely, your office is coming into your home, and so you have to change also some of your habits of working with your family, turning around, the children coming and saying, "Hey, mom, at what time do we eat?" So
it's, yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point, and it's something that I think anyone who's been working remotely during the pandemic can sympathize with. And that, of course, brings with it pressures and distractions and sort of juggling lots of things at the same time. And it's prompted a question from Edmund, who says, do we need to be more mindful of managing the mental health and well-being of employees? And I think that's a very interesting point, Christina, because some of the other elements of the research that has been done around this more generally showed that during the pandemic, we saw an increase in people's length of the working day, and in some regions of the world, the average working day was 5 minutes, almost an hour longer. There was an increase in people sending emails and responding to emails after working hours, and I suppose one upside was that generally meetings got shorter. So it's not all in one direction, but clearly there are pressures there, and you don't want your employees to burn out. So how do you think business leaders and managers can, to answer Edmund's question, be mindful of managing the mental health and well-being of their employees?
I think that is an extremely important topic, and on the one hand, as managers, we all need to be good role models, right, in terms of demonstrating how we have a good work-life balance, even in a work-from-home format, even in the distributed workforce type of model. Because if you send emails at night, or if you expect your employees to answer immediately, even within working hours, we know that a lot of us are still juggling homeschooling combined with work from home, and being mindful of that, being a good example, and not just as a single manager, but having that as a culture flowing across the business. And I think that needs to be very vocal and stated top down. And I think secondly, we shouldn't underestimate the impact it has on us not to be able to connect as humans in real life. I've been a remote worker for many years. I've run the Nordic region. Now I've been running a organization across Europe, Middle East, and Africa for almost 3 years. So I've been working a lot in different offices, remote, from home, kind of embracing that hybrid model over the years. but I've always been able to go into the offices and you really meet the teams, having our kickoffs, our get-togethers, all the social gatherings. And I've never felt as detached from my team as now. So the second point is we need to find virtual ways of connecting and making sure that our teams are connecting as well, to really get that same level of well-being and mental health as we do in the normal world.
And Kristine, I suppose that really comes to the fore when you consider the changing nature of any given team. At the moment, as we all went into the new way of working during the pandemic, teams, I suppose, were pretty much established, and there may have been a period of weeks and months where there were no new joiners. But we're now at the point where, 6 months on from when the lockdowns began and remote working became a necessity. And at this point, we will start to see movement. We will start to see people leave teams and join other teams. And Dr. Frey, I wonder if you have any practical advice you can share with business leaders on how to successfully manage this transition to a distributed workforce, and perhaps with a focus on how do you tackle those points that Kristine and Véronique raised about maintaining the cohesiveness of a team and particularly new joiners and making sure they feel integrated and supported and part of a team that they will never have been in the same physical space as.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. I think the first thing businesses need to do is actually think through what do we want to do remotely or as a hybrid model, and for what type of tasks do we want people to be at the office. So I think deciding what is preferable to do at meetings in offices and what to do remotely is the first key thing. I mean, if you're a trader, for example, working in a bank, you can trade from home, but the equipment you have at the office is going to be faster and better. I mean, if you're a lab technician, you have to come in to work. If you do things that are explorative, which are about innovating, which is about discussing and collecting ideas, then in-person meetings and sporadic interactions matter a lot. When I go to conferences, I'm less interested in the presentation often than I am at the dinner conversation or the people I interact with randomly. And those random interactions don't happen virtually the same way. And I think it's important to remember that even if you can do something more productively or efficiently at home, efficiency is not the same as innovation, and future efficiency depends on innovation. So if you sort of move towards a model that is entirely remote and you increase short-term productivity as a consequence of that, you may think that's great, but it may not be if innovation suffers as a consequence. So you very clearly need to think through what are innovative roles and innovative tasks that need to be done at the office, and you need to coordinate them so people actually meet at the office to facilitate those sporadic interactions. Secondly, you need to rethink what the office space is going to look like as a consequence of this. I don't think anybody thinks that skyscrapers are good office buildings these days, and that means a shift away from locations like Manhattan to suburbs potentially, when new office buildings will presumably be built, because yes, we will want to have some interaction, but we will also want to have some socially distant interaction in the future. There will be no gatherings any longer of 40 people in an elevator going up 40 floors. So we really need to rethink the office space as well. And in addition to that, Véronique has already discussed outcome-based management. I think that's absolutely key as well. So thinking about what can be done remotely or in a distributed way, what not, rethinking the office space, and rethinking performance evaluation systems. Those are those sort of 3 key points that I think are most critical.
Thank you, Dr. Frey. It's really interesting that point you raised about the in-person interactions, because, I think it is something that you can easily discount the value of attending a conference in person or a seminar And it's the breakout sessions, it's the coffee conversations, it's the lunch break conversations where sometimes the best ideas are sparked, and also sometimes where new connections are made that then really not only benefit the individual, but benefit the business as a whole. And I suppose the challenge is how you replicate that when people cannot as easily be in the same physical space. One idea that I read recently was that perhaps embracing virtual reality, and that if we had headsets in our home, we could attend a meeting virtually, and as we look around, we turn and see the person next to us. Perhaps in a breakout session, our avatars go off and have a virtual coffee as we discuss the ideas we've just heard. On that point, it may sound flippant, they're talking 5 years away, who knows? I don't have a VR headset, I don't know how many of you do, but it raises the broader point about technology as an enabler. And Kristine, if you can start us off on this area, what practical role can technology play in enabling a more engaged and empowered distributed workforce if people aren't getting that sort of stimulation and spark that they would get from seeing people face to face? Because as humans, that is so inbuilt into the way we work and the way we respond to situations.
Yeah, and as we have been discussing, this is really about embracing that hybrid model. But now more than ever, we need to consider that technological experience that we are providing our employees, because we believe that technology is really the interface for the physical and cultural experience of a remote workforce. And that is kind of that single factor that holds everything together and that enables that type of interaction. And I don't know if we will have, virtual headsets and doing conferences virtually in the future. But indeed, you need to support all of these needs and underpin it with technology. And you need that, single pane of glass to securely and efficiently access all your corporate systems and tools, regardless of where you work, but also to engage and interact with your colleagues. And we have already started to do our Friday gatherings and social events in a virtual format. We have these online games like breakout rooms where people are getting into groups, they do puzzles, they collaborate outside of their work tasks. And it's really proving to have an effect in feeling more as a team. Even though, in VMware, we have all been working from our homes since mid-February.
Thank you very much for that, Kristine. And Véronique, I wonder if you can share any sort of examples where Group Orange has used technology to enable and engage the distributed workforce. And if I can roll into that, a question to you from Lysiane, who says, can you share more details on the new physical digital model of work and management approach that Group Orange is exploring, which you referred to earlier?
Yeah, in fact, we are trying to reinvent the new team. For example, we have employees who have very small apartments, and so it's not so easy for them to be remotely working. So we are thinking to create co-working places where they could gather and not far from their home, and then the team would be the people living not far from my home and working in the same place than me, which doesn't mean that they belong to the same real team in the firm, but they will belong to the same firm, and they will gather 3 days a week or whatever in a place which is for Orange, for people living in this suburb or in this part of the town or somewhere on the territory. So that's what we call phygital, because we are sure that some people won't be able to work at home because it's too small, it's not so easy, etc., etc. So we can help. We have to help them to have because for example, in Paris and in suburbs, you have people that have to stay in the train 2 hours to come to the office and then take a train or metro to go back 2 hours. And so we want to help them to stay closer to their home, but not at home because they can't. it's a sort of remote, but it's not a home remote. It's a distributed work, as you said. So they will meet people working within Orange, but these people won't be the people of their team, but of the company. So I mean, we will have to be very agile once again, because the team will have different senses. You will have the team of your work. You mean you belong to a commercial team or something. You will have the team of the firm because you work not far from 2 or 3 other people working in the same, living in the same suburb. I mean, the team won't be the team you belong to when you come in the firm. It will be a new way of thinking the team. That's what we are. I hope I am clear. Because the time where I come, my boss is Mr. John Doe, and I belong to his team. I think we have to create new rituals, new ways of meeting, new coffee meetings, new lunch, new rituals, and it's a long way, but we have to do that if we want people to stay not far from their home, because it's really tiring to stay 2 hours in the train, etc. It's around the well-being, of course, and we really think that if people are in a personal good way of living, they will be more performant and more efficient. So it's a compromise between those two ways of thinking the work and the work for tomorrow.
A really interesting point, because for a lot of people, the commute is one of the most stressful parts of their day. For some, if the connectivity on their journey is not great, they end up finding they waste maybe 2 hours a day. I say waste, they might be reading, they might be watching, watching videos, friends, and that sort of thing. So perhaps not wasted. It's but I think it does raise an interesting issue about one of the key benefits of it. Of course, it does raise questions, Dr. Frey, doesn't it, about the duty of care? We had a question from Kyle on that, saying offering choice is key, allowing flexible working from anywhere is an option, but is the duty of care being extended from the office to the home? How do organizations handle that?
Well, I think we will probably see some additional legislation in that domain as well. And I think a lot of companies are currently engaged in talks with trade unions about that. But clearly, I mean, if you work remotely, then the duty of care extends to the place where you work, which is at home. So that's a conversation that is going to be held going forward. In addition, just to come back to the points made by Kristine and Véronique earlier about the role of technology in facilitating interaction at distance, I think one of the key things that artificial intelligence does, right, is matching, right? Whether it's matching you with the right movie on Netflix, or the right book on Amazon, or the right partner on a dating app. And I think what we will see increasingly in businesses as well is the use of artificial intelligence to match people for sporadic interactions based on their interests, based on what they're working on, and so on and so forth. So I think that is something where we will increasingly see technology being used as well. I don't think there are good substitutes for in-person interactions yet, to be completely honest, and I don't foresee that being the case in the near future. But I do think that we will see more of these sporadic interactions also online and virtually as a result of particularly artificial intelligence.
It's a really interesting point there, because I know when I started working from home, the team that I was working with, our immediate manager buddied us up, and it was done completely randomly, and we were paired off, and it was just to take 15 minutes to just chat one-to-one with that person about non-work stuff, just how we were finding the whole pandemic situation, what we were doing, just a kind of to have that connection and I suppose that well-being aspect. And I have to say, to start with, your initial reaction is, oh my goodness, what are we going to say? I don't know this person. What I found is that as we kept checking in every few days, every week, it does build a sort of a sense of cohesiveness and team spirit, and that is so important. I have a question. We're coming to the end of the session, but just very briefly, a question directed to Kristine. What should be the priority investments in this new way of working now, particularly when companies are probably looking to save more than spend?
Well, I think now is the best opportunity to fundamentally rethink the future of work in our own organizations, and looking both at business processes and rituals and how we onboard people, how we retain talent. But I always come back to the fact that technology is that key enabler, and we need to make sure that we build technology that is based on business needs, not IT needs, and it needs to have a user-centric focus. So I think that is really the critical point in terms of being that single pane of glass, that interface to everything that is work related, to really embrace the opportunities that the distributed workforce gives us.
And just in the last couple of minutes, we're almost out of time, but just very briefly, I wonder what you each think, just in sort of 30 seconds each, will be the key difference, the key benefit. Let's end on a positive. What will be the key benefit over the next 12 months to this anywhere way of working? And we'll start with Véronique.
I think it was a trend, and for me it's the word would be acceleration, and I think it's positive. We are going to rethink the teams and the way of creating a team. And I think it's really positive to accelerate that. And I think technology is there.
Okay, and Christina?
Definitely along that same track. I mean, the opportunity to really innovate in a situation that is completely new, where we don't have, these mental frameworks or scripts or manuscripts to how do we proceed from here. It's a totally new setting. It's a new world. The ability to innovate is it's just endless.
And Dr. Frey, the final word.
Well, I think if you see it over the next 12 months, we're still in a pandemic. So the key benefit from this is being able to work in the first place without catching a virus. But beyond that, we're actually seeing upsurge in patents when it comes to remote working. So we see a lot of innovation in that particular field, which is very noticeable. And I think that innovation is going to be very fruitful going forward to make this a sort of sustained way of remote working as well.
Okay, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you, Kristine Dahl Steidel, thank you, Véronique Karcenty, and thank you, Dr. Benedikt Frey. And, it did occur to me a while ago that if our standard way of working up until this year, if those standard ways never return, what will future generations think about the way we used to do things? They may well ask in bemusement, why on earth did they all travel at the same time of day to a central place, crammed into overcrowded transport systems, just so they could do work that could have just as easily have been done from home or elsewhere, if not better places to work. And they may wonder why people paid such premiums for small city centre homes just to be near the office when they could have much bigger places with outdoor space and gardens, perhaps, in places that weren't necessarily city centres. Tall skyscrapers, we may have to completely, as Dr. Frey referred to, think about what we now do with those in our city centres if they're no longer needed in the way that they have been. And it does throw up bigger policy questions for leaders. What about commercial property and long leases? Do they become a thing of the past? If it's not a necessary overhead anymore, will we see a glut in empty office buildings that need to then be repurposed? What about the viability of city centre businesses, shops, for example? And also for public policy questions, if we're not commuting to offices, how do you fund metropolitan transport systems? So it throws up so many broader questions and broader issues that, if we had another hour, we could delve into all of those, but I'm afraid our time is up. So we may have to leave that for another day. Thank you to all of you who've sent us in questions. I hope we managed to get to yours. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please let us have your feedback. And thank you very much for attending. Have a great day.